not gonna hear.
They should.
Go ahead and read the code of ethics in accordance with the code of ethics adopted by the council. All council members have a duty to conduct the affairs of the governing board in an open and public manner, free of conflicts of interest. Is there any item on the agenda, the outcome of which will have a direct, substantial, and readily identifiable financial impact for any council member, his or her family, or close business associate?
No.
Does any council member have a financial interest in any public contract coming before this council today?
No.
There being none, all board members have a duty and obligation to vote. Josh?
Oh, I don't even know where to start. Maybe I'll just turn it over to Ron and let him roll with it.
I'll give you the nutshell version, and then we'll probably need to let our guests tell us what they're here for. But 2016, 2017, there was an economic development enterprise agreement to construct infrastructure to serve the property where the bottom is to build a plant. That went through, the work has been done, the money's been spent, a bottom went bust. And so we have the property, the Mountain Center of Research and Technology, I think still owns one of its subs, and they want to do something else on it. And they're here to convince this board that an agreement was reached back then that the town would not annex if water was requested from the town. Historically, nobody has found that did not get reduced to writing in any fashion. And the first pushback from this board, the town's end was any agreement with the town must be in writing. However, the same statute gives the property owner and the town the ability to basically ratify a verbal agreement. They have sent a letter to you, I hope everybody got, setting out the timeline and what they hope to accomplish. You have a letter from me which I provided to council for the applicant, which states that a couple problems. As I see the law, the town cannot enter into an agreement to annex or not to annex except with another city. And second, annexation is a legislative activity that one council cannot bind a future council to. So there's two things that I see in the law, and they may have found some law to overcome that, I don't know. But that's where we are now, and they're going to, I'm assuming, make their presentation, convince you there was an agreement, and by such an agreement should be reached now or ratified now. If I've misstated it, they can correct that.
All right, very good. Someone from the Morningstar Group?
Yes.
Come up.
Is it okay if I
Give
sit?
your name.
Refer it
prefer to sit?
so we can record it,
All right, thank you.
and
very
you
much.
can heard.
Give your name and address.
All right. My name is Jeffrey Rother from Morningstar Law Group. Our address is 700 West Main Street, Durham, North Carolina, 27701. And thank you, Mayor Sobel, thank you, Council, Mr. Steve, Mr. Harold, for having us here today. Certainly thank you all for your time and attention. As I said, my name is Jeffrey Rother. We represent both Black Mountain Center for Research and Technology, LLC, and Mountain Life Development, LLC. Yet noted there was a reference to Mountain Life in the agenda, but our request is made on behalf of both entities. They own 3 parcels of vacant parcel land just outside corporate limits of the town, south of I-40 that comprise over 125 We are here to ask council to tie up a loose end that is important to the owners to move forward with developing this property. We originally sent a letter on April the 18th to request this meeting, and certainly thank you all for holding it. And our request, to be clear, is to ratify the town's commitment to provide water service to the property while it remains outside the town's corporate limits. As Mr. Steve mentioned, I sent a letter on Monday to supplement the request with some additional background information. I have a copy here if anyone doesn't have it, but if you all have that, I believe it's in the agenda. I hope you've all had an opportunity to review it, consider it. In short, we're here to tie the loose end. The loose end that arises from the 2016 plan to develop property to a bog, as Steve mentioned. This was a site that was subject to a public-private partnership that included many partners, including the town, the county, the state, Land to Sky, regional council, the Economic Development Coalition. And initially, the initial plans, the town wasn't involved. The city of Asheville was going to provide water to the project through infrastructure that was existing close by, but it was suggested to my client to get the town involved as a project partner, as a co-applicant on grants to provide water for the project. Certainly, we were amenable to that. My client recognized the financial benefits of the town involvement. It included a new pump station and extension lines to the water without cost to the town, including additional the service area, and to provide water for this project. But the project was already being planned by the county under the zoning of the county, and there would be significant additional costs to being within municipal limits. So my client asked for that provision of water from the town to be as part of an agreement that it wouldn't be annexed into, it wouldn't have to annex into the town's corporate limits for purposes of receiving that water. As Mr. Steve mentioned, there's an ordinance on the books that requires someone going out and seeking water from the town that's contiguous to town limits to submit an application for voluntary annexation. The town could either reject that or deny that, but it's an ordinance that's on the books here. The town agreed to the condition, and the MCRT, the acronym that I'm using in the letter, agreed to pay for some of the cost of that infrastructure that would be installed, design, and engineering of the pump station, and some shortfalls that were there that weren't covered by the EDA grants that were obtained for this project. That was all negotiated while the project was being kept confidential for economic development purposes. I think council can appreciate that most of these projects, including grants, tax incentives, are kept quiet while the negotiations are going on. So the only person involved at the time was the former town manager, Matt Settlemeyer. Once the project became public, Mr. Settlemeyer informed council who are supportive of the agreement. I have here, there's a resolution signed by the mayor, Mr. Harris, Mr. Sneed supporting the project and adopting a resolution to support that project and the grant. So at that time, once it was made public, Mr. Harris is here with us today. Former Mayor Harris became involved in the regular meetings among the project partners and took the lead on working with the city of Asheville on securing additional water supply to the town. So the reason we are here, as Mr. Sneed said, everything was moving along as planned, but eventually at bottom scrapped the development project and filed for Chapter 11. And that was an unfortunate circumstance, but by that point there had been some significant progress with regard to the infrastructure for this project. By that point, civil design concepts was retained on behalf of the town to move forward with the design of the water and sewer infrastructure. As part of the agreement that was reached, my client, the MCRT, paid its share for that infrastructure cost. They paid just shy of $250,000 in October and November 2016. The infrastructure was installed. So the pump station's in place. It's owned by the town. It's currently operating. And there are extension lines for that water system that, although our property is still outside corporate limits, there was an easement agreement given. The water line stretches, and not even just to the boundary of the property, it's on our property. The extension is there in the ground, ready to be used. And Nevada had actually started its work on the ground, although they didn't break ground building vertically. There were permits pulled for stormwater and some horizontal work. That was all pulled to Buncombe County, right? It was reflective of the agreement that was in place. Buncombe County was the regulatory body for the zoning and building, but water was to be supplied by the town under its proprietary function of operating a water system. So in short, the situation is this. The property's outside town limits. Town previously agreed to provide water to the site while it remained outside of the town limits. There doesn't seem to be any real dispute about that. Pavilions are here. My client representatives certainly can talk about how that agreement came to be. Former Mayor Harris is here to talk about his understanding of the agreement. If the council has any questions, I believe Jesse Gardner might be yours. Jesse's here, who is the gentleman who worked with Civil Design Concepts on designing the infrastructure on the town's behalf. But time has passed, staff has turned over, and that agreement, as Mr. Sneed mentioned, was never reduced to a formal signed contract. There is certainly some evidence of the contract, that there's evidence of in writing that the agreement existed, and I can get into that in a minute. But one is, it was never reduced to a formal development agreement or an infrastructure agreement or anything like that that staff can look at to say, okay, we can turn on the tap now and provide water. Earlier this year, my client sought to secure water capacity commitment letters just for potential development partners to understand that the water would be turned on when it was requested, and it would be there when needed. As I said, there's no additional infrastructure that needs to be built by the town in order to facilitate this. It would just be a matter of allowing us to tap into the line and extend through the property and receive service. And as I understand it, those can be provided under Mr. Harrell's opinion, staff's opinion, given the existing ordinance in place that typically requires anyone wishing to make application for water service to apply for voluntary annexation. Certainly, we appreciated the assistance in trying to figure out a solution to this. Mr. Harrell suggested that we apply, but not request actual annexation, things like that, but it put us in a tough situation, right? I mean, I think the zoning in Buncombe County is valuable. The client does not seek annexation. All it wants right now in the town is the water service that it agreed and provided financially to secure. As I understand, the staff does not dispute that the agreement was reached, but it does not have this formal bridge development agreement for them to be able to point to, and that's why we're here. There's certainly some options that our client has. Why we are here today is the best and most straightforward solution, and in our view, is to request council under state law to ratify the agreement that was in place in 2016. That's why we're here today. If the town intends to abide by its agreement, council can certainly ratify that earlier agreement as it existed in 2016 under existing state law. And that is where we get to, that is the background as far as the factual framework as we put in our letter. I'm happy to address any questions on the factual background. If not, I'd like to address Mr. Sneed's points on his concerns of the lawfulness of all of this. I did receive his letter to council that was sent on Monday. It was sent after I sent mine, so I obviously didn't have it or a chance to address those issues at the time that I wrote it, but I'm happy to address those here today.
Can I ask you a question? Sure. You say, what writing is signed by anybody from the town regarding this?
Well, I was just getting to that. Well-timed question. The point I was going to first, Mr. Sneed put in his letter, but said it here today, that we're here to convince the town that this agreement existed. We're not here to convince anyone of anything. This agreement existed. Staff's not disputing that. The question of why we're here, as I understand it, is the formal mechanism for staff to implement that. I have, and I passed it out, and this is not to take a shot at Mr. Sneed, but we find it, we have a holding March 2, 2017 email shortly after the project was announced, within a few months, from Mr. Sneed to Beth Kramer. Sorry, Beth Kramer was the attorney at the time that was representing Black Mountain Center for Research and Technology. And there's a long chain that goes back and forth, and it concludes in a March 2nd email where Mr. Sneed writes, the town usually insists on voluntary annexation of any property that wants the town to provide water to the property. The town did agree not to require voluntary annexation of the property your client plans to develop, while it did agree to provide water. So I'm happy to pass this out so you all can review it.
Please.
And if you don't mind, if I get a privilege to pass them out. And the language is there right on the first page. His email continues on to make the exact same point that he's making here today, is that it's a different issue between, to understand the issue and to understand what the town can and can't do under state law, it requires you to understand annexation and the town's authority to annex property. And there's traditionally two ways to do it. One is by voluntary annexation, which is a property owner submits a petition and says, town, I want to be within the town's limits, please add me in. The other is to involuntarily annex, which is a town on its own initiative saying, you know, this property would be great to be part of the town. The town's going to take action to redraw its limits so this town, that this property is included with the town, regardless of whether the property owner wants to be in the town or not. And there's two different issues at play here. One issue that was being discussed back in 2016 and 2017 is whether the town would agree to not use its powers of involuntary annexation, which is, will the town agree that it's not going to try to use its power under state law to bring this property within town limits against the will of the property owners? I agree with Mr. Sneed that that's something that the town probably cannot agree with the property owner. There's certain mechanisms between jurisdictions to agree to that, but I agree with him that that's something that would be questionable under state law. That's not why we're here, and that's not what we're asking. What we are here asking the town for is to provide water. We are asking the town to provide water to this property while it still is outside of the town's corporate limits. In other words, we are asking that the town provide water without requiring my clients, the property owners, to petition voluntarily for annexation. That's something the town typically does. So I take issue a bit with Mr. Sneed's letter and his positions, not because the statement's incorrect, but I think he doesn't properly address the request that we're making. We're not asking the town to never, in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, we're not trying to prevent it from using its involuntary annexation powers if it chooses that it wants to do that sometime in the future. What we are asking simply is for the town to provide water to this property outside of town limits, for which we contributed a significant amount of money to build the infrastructure to facilitate that. The infrastructure in place, it's already at the property. And the only way for that infrastructure to be used and for water to be used for the town to let's turn on. The only remaining issue then is, can this agreement be in place given the ordinance that typically requires a petition for voluntary annexation? And I think the answer to that is yes. And I'm confident that if the town were to ratify the 2016 agreement, we can reduce it to writing a signed agreement in a way that will comply with state law. In part because I don't think the ordinance that's in the agenda and that's pointed to here actually applies in the circumstances. For two reasons. First, it's worth noting that this is section 48-164, referring to extensions to mains and services. This is not an issue of extensions of any mains. The main's there. I understand the purpose of these ordinances. The town's not alone in having an ordinance like that. Local government is typically wants to make sure that if someone's going to tap into the proprietary water system, and the town's willing to pay for extensions of mains that are often quite costly to run water service properties, that the town's going to see some return on that, not just in the form of water service, but annexing the property and having property taxes collected along with it. That's not a crazy expectation. Here, one, there's no extension of mains required. The mains are there. And second, they've been paid for already, and they weren't paid for out of town's coffers. They were paid for by grants, including through contributions from the property owner. So that consideration is not there. And second, the text of the ordinance says that any developer or property owner wishing to make application for water service to property that is contiguous to the corporate limits of the town, and it goes on talking about the requirement for the petition. Here, we're certainly property is contiguous to the town's corporate limits as of today, as we're sitting here. But it also says wishing to make application for water service to property. Sure, we're here now asking for water. But what we're asking for is to ratify the agreement that was reached in 2016. The circumstances are much different then. The circumstances then was that the city of Asheville was prepared to provide water to the property, and that was the original plan. We didn't ask for the town to provide water. It was suggested to us that it would be cost savings, a simpler solution for the town to do it, given the location of certain things, and we were amenable to that, and certainly recognize the benefits that would be provided to the town from that, and we were looking forward to having a mutual beneficial relationship. So in 2016, when this agreement was reached, it wasn't that we were seeking out this water service and looking to tap into the town system for our advantage. The town and the partners came to us. So under those circumstances, it would seem odd to require us to petition for annexation, and given the text of the ordinance, I don't think it applied as of 2016. And finally, even if, and I'm trying not to handle this as a corporate setting, we're in an odd circumstance where we're addressing to the council the lawfulness of an agreement that hasn't been reached, and I'm certainly trying to handle this as respectfully as possible. The point is, even if that agreement was inconsistent with the ordinance at the time, we fully believe that it would comply with state law, which controls here General Statute 168-320 is part of the section that allows the town and all of the government to operate proprietary water and sewer service both inside town limits and outside town limits. As part of that, 320 allows for contracts between local government and property owners to provide for infrastructure. It allows for fee rebates and things like that, but certainly doesn't limit the type of contracts that can be made for a property owner that constructs or provides financially for the construction of water infrastructure that will ultimately become on the town, which we have here. So, I fully believe that that agreement complies with 168-320 at the time it was reached, and there would be no problem under state law for the town to ratify that contract or written agreement right now. So in short, we don't have any concerns regarding the lawfulness of this request. And accordingly, on behalf of my clients, both Life Development LLC and Black Mountain Center for Research and Technology, we hereby ask the town council to consider ratifying the agreement to provide water for this property while it's outside the town limits. If council is amenable to that approach, certainly can work with staff on a written agreement that will ensure that the owner can request and obtain water service when needed without requesting annexation. And so I thank you all for your time and consideration of this issue. I'm here and can answer any questions that anyone may have on that. The legal issues, and as I mentioned, we've had some guests, the abilities are here. Mr. Gardner, the design infrastructure is here. Former Mayor Harris, who I'm sure you all know, is here. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to address them. If not, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Dana Mobility for just a minute, who I understand, who I just a few remarks that you want to make.
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
How long did Beth Kramer represent them? Yeah, it was Nancy. Was it past March of 2017?
Yeah, why don't you come outside and you could share the microphone.
State name.
Yes.
Dana Mobilio, representing Black Mountain Commerce Park, Black Mountain Center for Research and Technology and Life Development. My address is 75 Danny Lane, Lake County. To answer your question, is Guzman, Rose, Culver, and Kramer has represented real estate transactions for us dating back to at least 2007. And so our approach was, in 2016, these agreements were made under the Economic Development Confidentiality umbrella. Once the governor was on site, announced the project, it became public knowledge. The town passed the resolution in support of the project. We then knew that there was this loose end that needed to be tied up. We needed some sort of formal documentation to memorialize this agreement. We had tried through the county's attorney, was assisting with easements, and we asked him to attach it to easement provisions. We had asked, there were a couple other layers where we had requested it to be memorialized. Eventually we went to Beth and said, are you familiar with development agreements, water service agreements, infrastructure agreements? She said, yes, we've done many with municipalities. Would you be willing to help us work with Mr. Sneed and the town to draft this document? That process probably unfolded for 3 to 4 months. There were long gaps where Mr. Sneed was not in communication with her, and we kept saying this needs to get resolved, it needs to get memorialized, to the end that Mr. Sneed's comments, that along with all the other economic development professionals that knew our position, knew the agreement. Mayor Harris was an alderman at the time, Jesse, everybody knew our position. He said, obviously, it's agreed upon because they're willing to move forward and not require annexation. There were multiple benchmarks along the way, which would have typically been the threshold that this subject would come up, and it was obvious the agreement. So it's a long answer to your question.
My question about that was because this email, which council provides and says where Mr. Sneed says that he acknowledges what Matt Settlemyre agreed to on behalf of the town, but then he goes on to say you can't do it. Well, and I just want to know, was there other emails from your council why didn't they follow up on it? I mean, it seems like a pretty convenient stop on the email chain.
Well, I'm happy to address your question. I think it goes to the issue of the two different paragraphs and the two different issues that we're talking about here, right? So the first paragraph is our what we're requesting today, which is an implementation of an agreement that the town can provide water to the property without requiring voluntary annexation. And he acknowledges that agreement is made. But the rest of it,
But not by the council.
I think Mr. Settlemeyer certainly made the agreement. As I wrote in the letter, and I think Mr. Harris can speak to, the council was apprised of the agreement to provide water to the property while it was in the town. And we supported it. If the question is, was it formalized to a written contract? Not that we're aware of. And certainly that's why we're here, right? If we had one, we wouldn't be here today. But the second paragraph, or the third paragraph, I'm sorry, that carries over to the second page, talks about an entirely different issue, which is the one Mr. Sneed's referring to now that can't be done, which is an agreement to have the town agree to never use its involuntary annexation powers. We're not asking for that, and that's not what we're here to. Thank you.
You made a statement in there earlier when you said that the evidence, when you were first talking, you said you got evidence that the contract would exist. And I'm just saying, is this evidence what you have passed out here? Is that what you're referencing?
As I mentioned, Mr. Christie, thank you for the question. So, up front, we haven't made a public records request or anything like that to the town. We haven't had the town scour its records yet. My clients, so I'm not aware of any formal written 2-page agreement signed by the mayor, signed by council, that you would typically see in an infrastructure reimbursement agreement or development agreement or like. Nothing that I'm aware of went to a public meeting and was formally adopted through those procedures.
I'm saying,
As far as
you made reference.
So,
but I just wanted to
Yes, yeah,
that
so-
there's really nothing there. So we referenced that, but there's nothing to back that up.
My point is, there's a difference between what I'm trying to make the distinction between is a formal written, duly comes forward to council in a public meeting. I'm not aware of any such group. But certainly, people within the town, in 2016, made the commitments to provide that water. The email from Mr. Sneed confirms that that commitment was made. So we do believe that the agreement was made. If it was not, even if not, adopted by the council. And second, I think the factual circumstances of what actually played out is reflective of that agreement. Right? So the money was paid. It was the money that would otherwise my client would have no obligation to pay for this infrastructure. The infrastructure was installed is owned by the town, right? And it stretches into our client's property and terminates it. It was installed specifically for the property. And at the bottom, before it unfortunately scrapped this development project, was applying for permits, doing stormwater permits to develop the property from Buncombe County. It wasn't applying for permits to the town. There was no petition for annexation. Development was starting to move forward under circumstances that were reflective of the situation that was agreed upon by everyone, that water would be provided by the town while this property was outside its growth limits, being regulated for planning purposes by Buncombe County.
Thanks for coming and sharing all this information. I know that the 5 of us were not involved at that point in time, right? So we're all trying really hard to catch up and follow the threads through all of the whole thing. Thank you for providing information too. So help me, you may have already said it, but just to clarify.
Sure.
the council or the board of aldermen at that time passed a resolution. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it was a general resolution to, show support for the project. And I could pass it out.
Okay, so it was to show support for the project, but it wasn't about the annexation in particular?
Pass it out.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
That way I don't need to characterize it. Just take
I
a look.
appreciate it, thank you.
Mr. Harold, would you like one?
All right, so, this doesn't really shed any light on the annexation question, but,
It doesn't. It says that it's the town supports the project for purposes of supporting infrastructure. It's the town's part.
so I have no skin in this game, so I'm asking questions of everybody, right? I'm not really clear on how, if Mr. Sneed, cites a couple of statutes and ordinances, and we have the highlighted version of our ordinance there. How could the town agree to these things if these issues were, I mean, these same statutes and ordinances were in place at the time, no?
Yes. There was.
So how did the town get behind the annexation, the lack of annexation then?
And I can't answer that. Ms. Rhodes provided you with a string of emails I had with Beth Kramer, where I knew nothing, was having to pick the information from that and pass it on to her. And that's the information that I gave to Beth, is what Matt told me. And that was sort of in the middle of the process. That's in 2017. Things are moving forward. And as Mr. Christie noted, it, from my end of the thing, it just sort of dried up. I was out of the loop until I was asked to certify that the easement was in before we put water lines in. So I can't tell you much there. Let me help the other side a moment. And I don't have a side, but the town's trying to figure out if there was a deal. The LLC, the bidders are trying to say there was a deal, and I'm trying, I think Mr. Rutherford almost walked me up the edge of what the deal might be, but I think, and he could tell me if I'm putting words in his mouth and missing base entirely, but I think he's trying to get this town to just confirm that the water was already requested, the time for asking for voluntary annexation, decided whether or not to pursue that is passed, and they're just wanting the water under the agreement, reach back then, provide water because that was the time an annexation should happen. I do disagree with whether or not the law applies to voluntary or involuntary. The statute's absolutely silent as to what kind of annexation. And third, I'm not going to figure this all out by myself, but Freya Bluestein addressed it in an article in which she was a school of government. I'm sure most of you heard her name. I've said it 1,000 times. She treated it as voluntary annexation. In an economic development scenario, the town cannot agree not to annex as part of an economic development agreement.
Say that again.
Freya Bluestein, in one of her articles, pretty precisely stated, and it's in 2015, so obviously this is a statement Freya was making before our enterprise even started. She just said that that is not a negotiation tool in an economic development agreement. We cannot agree not to annex. However, I think that maybe, if my paraphrasing Mr. Lover's position is correct, that would be irrelevant. If in fact we're trying now at this point, he's asked us to ratify the whole economic development agreement, then I think greater rules apply. It's not as easy as it sounded before I showed up this morning. If this board found that the deal was done, it's just we got a delay in turning the water on, the agreement was then, we're not going to annex, well, you've asked for water, and we aren't asked you to annex. That decision was made, and he's trying to get you to recognize that and verify that that party's over. The water's already asked for, they've just waited 6 years to turn it on. The weakness in that is the lack of a written agreement makes it hard to nail down that time and event.
I'm starting to feel like Perry Mason.
I was gonna say, I don't mean to interrupt this, Kim, but if I could make one comment. Well, I like council to feel like it can resist the urge to feel like the judge.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, council's not here, and we're not asking council to make a decision as to whether this agreement is lawful. That's not your role. I'm to state, to respond and to agree with Mr. Sneed, yes. What we're asking for is we're not asking for an agreement to bind the town on its involuntary annexation powers. I haven't seen the article you referenced. I assume I know what it says based on its characterization, and it's not what we're asking for. What we are asking is the recognition, whether it's in the form of agreement, some other procedure that the lawyers come up with, which is back in 2016, this is how it was dealt with. It was agreed that the water was going to be provided outside town limits, and that's what we're just going to continue on with that agreement. This process would just be a ratification, the fancy legal term for saying that we're just going to give effect to that how it was addressed back in 2016. That would give staff, Mr. Harold, and everyone that needs it, direction on how to execute this situation, this exposition. So what we are really here for, I think that would be helpful at this point, is to know whether the town would support and continue to support the arrangement that was made back in 2016 for water to be provided to the parcel outside of town limits. I'm not aware of the reason that a detriment of comes to the town from agreeing to that, continue to earn some revenue from the water once it's turned on for this infrastructure that's been built. So to paraphrase, we're not asking for a ruling here on whether this is legal or not. I'm confident that if we hear support from council, that it continues to be in support of the provision of water to this property while it remains from the county, that I can work with Mr. Steve, I believe you're retired soon, so maybe your successor.
You need to get done by 2:30.
Or maybe that's your successor, who I think I already know who that is. I'm confident that we can come up with whether it's a more precise resolution or a short written agreement to fully comply with state law to just make clear that this was the agreement that was reached in 2016, and the town staff can execute that and can turn the water on when it's requested. Is in short. So again, I don't mean to belabor this, but we're not asking for a ruling here today. I think what we're asking for is an indication as to whether council would be supportive of any such agreement, and we can, the lawyers can work together about putting a document together that for presentation for a later vote or whatever the procedure would need to be to implement that.
I have a question, probably for Mr. Sneed or potentially Josh. The town was, I assume, was involved in the grant applications for the new well and any sort of expansion of the water system out to this property.
No well.
No, it's a pump station and water and sewer lines.
Again, this was kind of funny because I got left out of the loop of much of it. Matt was doing most of the discussions. But yes, the town was pulled in because, and again, I think his characterization, because he knows more than I do at this point about how the town got pulled in. But the town, a couple of factors at play here. Some of you know that we had been after the city of Asheville to get certain water lines within our city limits for 20 plus years. And those lines were aging. And my theory is that when this project came along, Asheville saw that this was an opportunity. First off, let us be the lead, tied into their water system since they're right on the edge of us, and get rid of those aging City of Asheville water lines, which, as you know, they are now ours and we are now fixing them. I think that was probably part of the reason the City of Asheville wanted us to play this game. But once again, we were a grant applicant. The town was the lead party on construction. The town signed all the contracts to install the water and sewer.
One of the things I want to go back to, speaking of this, some of the facts that you referenced earlier, I was the mayor then. And I remember driving back from Asheville in September and noticing a big white tent over on this, it used to be called the Monte Vista Farms. And there's a lot of people over there, and I kind of wondered what was going on. And come to find out the next day when I asked Matt about it, he said, well, Governor Pat McCrory was up here for a dedication. You would think that the mayor would have been made aware of this. The mayor was completely uninformed that any of this was going on. So I mentioned that just as a little background. So then the following month, which you see the date here on this, is October 13th, 2016. Here's this resolution from Larry, which then comes up. And I am unaware of all the little details that this is supposed to be in there. I don't vote on this. The board did go ahead and vote on it, as you can see. But there's no mention in here of annexation. There's no mention in here of water. There is a mention of the reason that this board was really behind it, was really the very last words in the third paragraph, creation of 551 jobs. So then you begin to get into next year, and we're talking about all these delays. Well, I was still here until December of 2017, and there was no push from anywhere to go ahead and get a written resolution. Never, that I recall at all. And this thing about getting the water from the City of Asheville, when I first got on the board 10 years prior to that, we've been working with the City of Asheville to try to go ahead and get these water lines in here. So the idea that we were working with the City of Asheville to get water was not germane to this project. It was germane to the west end of Black Mountain. So why nothing was done, why the pressure wasn't put on, I was a developer. I know you run into roadblocks. And there's sometimes you just got to push through and you've got to be on someone's doorstep. And we never received, I was never made aware of any of this, that they needed a written agreement. So I just think that in this case, my feeling on it is the fact that the reason that we went ahead, the board voted for this was the creation of 551 jobs. That's not an issue now. So I think this thing of providing water was based upon that very fact that day.
So let me ask you this. The way I see it right today, this moment in time, we're being asked to deviate from our own ordinance in that the highlighted ordinance. So can you address that, or maybe Josh can, about how do we legally deviate from our own ordinance?
Well, I think that's one reason we're here. From a staff perspective, we didn't see a way to do that. So, that we our interpretation all along has been, and I've had numerous conversations with Dana and many other people, was the fact that this process needed to be followed, and it was never followed from the beginning. At least if it was never granted. So from a legal standpoint, I think that's why we're here, to talk about what other option there may be to do that. And I don't know of one, and I think that's why we've got our attorneys here talking that through. and it's not very helpful, but.
I'm happy to address your question.
Please, thank you.
So what we were asking is to implement decisions that to ratify an agreement to what was reached in 2016, which was that the town would provide water outside of the court limits, right? And that was handled, however it was handled in 2016. We can't change that. We can't change what happened in 17, 18. So from my perspective, we're not currently making a request. We're not doing anything today that would be inconsistent with that ordinance because, one, there's no main that needs to be extended. Number two, when this decision was made in 2016, we were, if you look at the ordinance, we were not a property owner or developer wishing to make application for water service. Because, and I can't, there's no the background between the town and Asheville, these water lines, I'm not trying to get anything said about that, but the fundamental point is that we did not reach out to the town to ask for water to be supplied to the property. The behind the scenes discussions were between the different jurisdictions. I can't speak to that. I don't think our client can speak to that either. One point is that, asking that the grant application included the town to provide water. So we need to review this ordinance in circumstances of the lens of what was agreed to. Given state law and the ability to craft infrastructure agreements between towns and local government. I think it was fully within town's authority to make that agreement, given the factual circumstances of this ordinance and what state law provides. And what we're asking here today is just to ratify and implement the agreement.
Do we know why this wasn't continued in 2017 when it was being discussed between Beth and Ron? Why did we not move forward with ratifying that?
Go ahead, speak to that. We had sought a development agreement, which, as I understand, is a formal contractual agreement. Mr. Snead said that the town was unable to enter into a development agreement with a property owner outside of the town limits. So that was not an allowable method. I've got documentation from everybody involved in the easement applications to the water line and granting the town easements across our property. The county's attorney said that if we want the language included in the easement, that but for this agreement, we would not be providing this easement. He said that was not an appropriate mechanism to make this agreement. And then Beth, communicating with Mr. Snead, gave us the comfort that the town was obviously in agreement with this. They had not approached us regarding annexation before putting the water lines in, before receiving the easements, before cashing the $225,000 checks that we wrote for the process. And we said, this is wonderful. We're glad to have a good working relationship with the town, mutually beneficial agreements in place, and let's move forward under this arrangement.
You mentioned, Mr. Rutherford, that you were not asking for, you're just asking for the water. And you're not asking for involuntary annexation for 5, 10, 15, 25 years.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? I don't quite understand.
So yeah, state law has two different provisions regarding annexation. Two different parts. There's a part of state statutes that allow property owners to petition to request for annexation. That would be, it's called voluntary. Basically, a property owner reaching out and say, hey, I'd like to become part of this town or the city. And there are procedures that the council can follow to take care of that. There's also provision that used to be more prevalent within North Carolina, but now is often used today, which is referred to as involuntary annexation, which is a town bringing property into its borders against, even if the property owner doesn't care to be within the jurisdiction. So we are not asking for any limits or agreement as to the town's involuntary annexation powers. That's the concern that Mr. Sneed raised, which was any such agreement may be contrary to state law. But from our perspective, that's fine. If the town feels like in 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, that it's in its interest to annex this property involuntarily against the will of whoever owns it at that time, we're not asking for any limits to that power. If the town can follow state law and accomplish that, by all means. So that's the distinction I'm making. We're not trying to hamstring the town's ability to annex this property if it chooses to.
In the past few years, or the past decade, we've had a couple of instances where we have a development called the Sedgwick, which is down on number 9, large development. They were in a similar situation, in fact, they couldn't go forward with development just like they all can, because you don't have water. And of course, then they went ahead and they voluntarily annexed themselves to get the water. Isn't that true with Brooks Code?
Brook Code absolutely did annex to get water.
They annexed to get water. So my main question is, I mean, we can talk about all these laws and everything, but why wouldn't this development want to be part of Black Mountain? They're close to Black Mountain. They're going to get all the amenities of Black Mountain. I don't understand. I was a developer. I understand this, that you go ahead and you develop this property. This does not mean that you're going to have to pay the tax on this property for the rest, because you're going to sell these lots off. And the subsequent buyers are going to be in part of the town, and they'll be paying into the town. So I don't quite understand why you don't want to come into the town of Black Mountain and be part of the town.
If I respond to that, that is not our position. 50 acres of the Commerce Park is within the town's jurisdiction. We look forward to the opportunity to work with the town to see that come to fruition, to the valley's mutual benefit. We are not opposed to the property on the south side of the interstate in the county's jurisdiction becoming a part of the town. The implication to us, and the reality is, for 15 plus years, including 12 of which the Department of Commerce has requested us to certify the site for economic development, we have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars planning, engineering, doing due diligence, applying for state certification for the site, contributing to this water extension in order to be able to plan appropriately under the county's jurisdiction, under the county's zoning regulations, under the county's permitting regulations. And so the vested interest that we have thus far is what we're requesting to be able to continue with. If we all of a sudden have to shift and be amenable to town zoning, town's permitting requirements, town's density requirements, it completely changes the nature of our planning, our marketing, our ability to attract quality economic development projects. We are not opposed to that property becoming a part of the town of Black Mountain. We even internally have had conversations of, is there a way to agree the benchmark, the threshold that we were presented with last fall is an interested economic development project came to the town looking for a water location. They were told, here's the voluntary annexation form, fill this out, and we'll consider providing water. They came back to us and said, quote, you told us we were in the county, you told us we were zoned employment, you told us, and now we're presented with this. We said, yes, we've got all these agreements from 2016 that allowed for the town's water pipe to be in the ground versus the city of Nashville's. We said, let us work with the town to understand these economic development conversations that took place, with the negotiations, the reason that we got involved, the reason why the Black Mountain water line was in the ground. We're not opposed to, as each parcel gets developed and there's a certificate of occupancy, that triggers that piece becoming a part of document. But for us to unravel 15 years of planning and engineering, and now be placed under a new set of rules is, it's not
Part of one of the reasons why Brooks Cove came in was because it was advantageous for them to come into the town because of the zoning was less restrictive than that of what was in the county at the time. And also too, the fact that you have invested money in this, but then again, you've also been the beneficiary of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars from all these entities, these 8 entities that are listed, that ended up improving the road access, a sewer line, which you couldn't do this if you did otherwise, you have to use septic tanks. So, you know, this has been very, very beneficial to Black Mountain Technology, all of these different grants that were got. So again, I still don't understand. I don't think that this is gonna unravel. I haven't seen the plans, but judging from what the county's zoning is and what our zoning is, the differences are not night and day.
I don't know if this is a planning board question or a question for council. What zoning classifications would you apply to this property? Would it be that the neighboring contiguous town boundary? Would it be equivalent to the employment zoning of the county right now?
Well, that would depend upon, as far as I'm concerned, that would depend upon what plan that you have. At the present, you have some of this into economic development for factories, because obviously half of them was in there. And you have a certain portion of that, the other part of it, you've got for residential. So, you know, that is a question for the planning board, it is a question for the board to decide, but there again, that's something that can easily be worked out.
I respectfully suggest that you look at the Blue Ridge Road small area plan that the town commissioned. I think you are aware of our intentions and our plans. We're in your report as one of the major stakeholders in that western end of the town. So respectfully, you do know our intentions and our plans.
And so I don't see that there's that much difference whether you're in our, in the jurisdiction annexed to Black Mountain or remain in the county.
So Josh, if they applied for voluntary annexation, walk me through the process. It goes to the planning board, then it comes to us, and we can vote at that point, yes or no?
That's correct. You'd also want to do if they're going to want to come in, if it's going to end up being that they do come into town, you're also going to have to give them a zoning district as well, because they don't have one, not now with town. But those can be run concurrently.
I guess what I'm getting at is just because you apply to be voluntarily annexed doesn't mean it's necessarily a done deal.
It doesn't mean that y'all vote to approve that. You can always vote not to approve that. That's right.
But you can neither agree to annex, and you can't agree not to annex. That question's answered at the time it comes before.
Uh-huh.
But you're not obligated to annex. That's part of the way that works. The ordinance works if you can only ask them to apply, and you're not saying we will annex. That is a decision to time and the crux of all that's going on here today. But yeah, I think your question is, if it comes before you, that you get the petition, then you say no, yes, you can say no.
But I think to Mr. Steve's point, that's the difficult situation we're in, right? Certainly appreciate all of the work material he's doing and trying to work with him. And his suggestion was, well, put up a petition that we can talk about it. Well, as Mr. Steve points out, this board, council can't agree in advance to say, hey, we're going to deny this, right?
Correct.
So when the minute we submit that application, it's out of our hands and we're on paper asking for something that would be inconsistent with what we're actually asking for. So that's why we're here today, is we thought there are options and there are some solutions that can be put in place. But we felt before considering our options, talking to council about what happened, where we are, and why we're here, made no sense, because there's nothing under state law that I'm aware of that would prevent this council from acknowledging, ratifying, and allowing staff to execute the agreement, how it's played out in 2016.
Ron, walk me through, because this is an area I don't know anything about, these, I'm sure this isn't the right word, but from the outsider, secret development agreements, okay, that go on behind closed door economic development, also may pop up like this. What authority does the town manager have to bind the council to an agreement?
In the absence of a resolution giving him that authority, which in this case might be an unlawful delegation of power, I don't know that the town manager has the ability to bind the town.
I mean, that's what's the trouble. I mean, I understand that Matt Settlemeyer said this. Okay, I get that. But I just wonder if it's contrary to what the rules are, and even the mayor says he didn't know anything about it. I don't, that's what's troubling me is this is a public body. These are public rules, and you have these secret dealings. And then now, 6 years later, we want a public body to agree to something we don't know anything about. And that's hard for me, I'll just say that.
I'm wondering if Mr. Harris might be able to shed some light. Did you plan on making some comments today or no?
Only if asked.
Here's your big chance. If you'd rather not, that's okay, but I'm really trying to understand how things went.
This is Larry Harris, 101 Richard Lane, White House. So, questions?
Well, could you respond to the gist of my question that I'm trying to understand what happened? That, as I interpreted it, Matt Settlemeyer, the town manager, made an agreement contrary to existing rules. And now, and apparently the mayor at the time didn't know anything about it. And so, A, why didn't it go before a council for ratification? And then how can we ratify something we don't know anything about?
Right. So, I don't know the realities of how ABC works, so I get that. But none of us know we're on council. Got a call today before the governor came up. And so did everyone else. I can't speak for them, so did everyone else. And we were excited about it. Good news.
551 jobs.
And not only that, but just that infrastructure that was a bond. That was only a bond, but the infrastructure for that end of town.
Right.
And we were discussing getting $250,000 pump station into the capital improvement plan, which we got one. We got $800,000 from, these are round numbers, $800,000 from EDC, $800,000 from Golden Leaf. And then, NCDOT put a road in there, it's $1 million road based on, Frenchburg River NPO records. And so that's a lot of benefit to the town of White Mountain. So I think I heard council and Mr. Lobelia spoke about why there wasn't an agreement brought to the town, because that was, my recollection is that there was nothing that came from staff, and this is after the pump, right? There's resolution that we passed that said, hey, we're excited about that. We're good. We're going to sign on as a contracting municipality. That's basically what that moved us for. But why staff nor legal counsel didn't say, we got an issue here we need to resolve. I can't speak to it. It just didn't come up. I did, when this came up, when someone approached you last fall, and I was still in office, I did call, Councilmember Stone, Councilmember Collins, Councilmember Tuttle, and of course, Councilmember Showers is deceased. And their recollection was as mine, that implicit in the town contracting, for the water portion of the water infrastructure was MSD. I remember correctly, that's how it works. MSD was the contracting for the sewer, right? That implicitly we're going to sell water to them. I mean, what everything was for, right? We benefited from it, right? And so that was Maggie, Don, and Ryan's recollection as well. It simply never came up, but we obviously understood that we'd be selling water. The issue of annexation simply did not come up. As a matter of fact, the first time it came up to me was that Nate Pennington, correct, county planning director, reached out and said, Autumn's building permits are about to expire. Do you think that they want to come at that property? They want to bring it into White Mountain town limits because it gives time to do it if they wanted to. And so we could reach out and they did not want to. And didn't occur to me that there was an issue that needed to be resolved at that time. That was just last fall. Does that make sense? That helps out?
Yeah, that's.
But the Black Hawk thing, it's just, there's nobody aware of anything. And so, Jesse's still back there? Yeah. And I would ask if Jesse, and I don't know if he can speak to it if he was, but, in any of the more confidential meetings, I was not. I did start attending all the meetings once it came out. And I would say that in all those meetings, and Jesse was in all those meetings as well, and there were monthly meetings for a good while, as I recall. So there were quite a few meetings. And MSD would be there, I think Nate would be there, the county planning director, people from the natural gas company, people from Duke Power, all the folks that would be involved with all that were there, and annexation never came up. That probably wouldn't from all these utility people and so forth, but from county government, nor from Matt, who was in those meetings as well. So,
And you were there because you were the town's representative to the MPO?
no, I was there because I was the town's representative to that. And I don't know that there's ever anything formal, but, I just attended, I started receiving invitations to come to the meetings, probably because I went to the EDC meetings. It's pretty psychic.
Tell me about
But
that. What is that?
An Economic Development Coalition
Okay.
is they receive their own funds, just for those that may not be aware, they receive, back then, that wasn't that long ago, maybe $500,600,000, something from the county. They received money from the city of Asheville. The town of Black Mountain could have a seat on the Economic Development Coalition Weaverville has a seat, and Black Mountain had a seat if you want to give $60,000, $80,000, $100,000, to EDC. That's how the county has a seat. There's a couple of commissioners on there. Mayor Manheimer serves on it. I think she still always is, as long as I can recall, representing the city of Asheville. Weaverville is on it, and you have various members of the community that are on it, and which they may contribute money. I know, for instance, Mission Hospital has a seat. Well, it's actually HCA, the president of HCA Carolinas has a seat. So that entity, and then what happens if you go to an EDC meeting, they meet, public, they're interesting, you should go if you get up and go over there. I don't anymore, but, there's a lot of good information they provide, job information, growth, that all sort of thing. But then they go into executive session to discuss their business because they're discussing things that wouldn't work if it was public. They just couldn't do it. So that gives you some background, those who aren't familiar, that's why the confidentiality. My guess is that in some cases where these things take place, there's still discussions, they're just maintaining confidentiality. My guess is, this is just my guess, that Matt, and I know it's just me, okay? That Matt kept it close to the vest with everybody because of confidentiality reasons within the structure he was in. Because he could have been blown out of the water pretty easily. So, and it's still a good opportunity for the town right now. The property's still there, water and sewer, and I think it's still a great opportunity for the town, frankly, to work with the developers. They put skin in the game as well, and it can work well for everybody. So that's my 2 cents.
If I might add, and correct me, Mr. Harris, but Alderman Harris at the time was helping negotiate or in charge of negotiating the water agreement with the city of Hatchville.
Well, that was really, actually by that time, Kevin Turner was involved.
That was enough.
With this new reality of the pump being there, with
Oh,
the
yeah.
town being able to take over 600 plus customers, with the town being able to purchase as much water as they wanted, from what I understood. Mr. Harris was critically involved with CDC, Jesse Gardner, our engineers at McGill, to understand, A, what the demand from the town would be for those customers and other future development, not associated with us, but also our site, what was the demand? Potentially going to be over a 20-year period of time.
And, the other benefit that came to this is these 600% of customers that the town has picked up over the past few years, and that water system, that infrastructure really feeds into that, allows us to serve those customers. Is that, as you recall from the Wither Ravenel presentation, I'll make that definition first, but presentation, it did that 5 or 6 years, and you pay it off. You start getting a return on those investments. It just takes a little while. So it's a real plus to the town, but what we did back then, it's just y'all's decision, obviously. But hopefully that helps.
When we start looking at the benefit to the town of the 600 customers, we've got aging water lines that we have been working on for the past 5 years, and we'll continue to be working on for the next 10, 15 years.
Right.
So whether or not that it was a benefit to the town, it was a benefit to the pump station to be there.
No,
but
Withers and Ravenel said it was a benefit to the town about 6 or 7 years.
They may have said that, but it's when you start looking at the amount of money that we're having to spend on this water system.
No, Withers and Ravenel, the engineer said the payoff would be about 6 years. I kind of know with him.
I respectfully disagree.
I would say.
So I'm just gonna say out loud, I really hate being in this position, and I know you didn't do this, but don't ever let this happen again. I get something in writing next, we gotta nail all the things down, so 6, 10 years from now, another council's not trying to figure it all out, right?
Well, I remember conversations with Matt. We were told, sworn to confidentiality in these large economic development meetings in Asheville at the chamber, 20 to 30 people present from state agencies, federal agencies on that, as Larry described. Everyone was sworn to confidentiality until there was a minute that Raleigh was going to release the statement that the governor was going to be on site. I think it was somewhere in the 24 hours ahead of his arrival. It might have been 22 hours. I don't quite remember. Everybody was sworn to confidentiality until that moment. When the town got brought into the conversation, it was for 3 months, City of Asheville was the water provider for the project. They were in these meetings. They were understanding capacity. They were understanding the size of the line that needed to be brought into the project. And then the Golden Wheat Foundation, if you're aware of what they do, but they came in and said, this is great. You've got all the infrastructure available. we see that there could be some financial savings to all these partners. If the town were to come in, they get this pump, they've been trying to, maybe the town had applied for funding from them for that pump, I don't know. But they said there's a fiscal responsibility that we have, and there's a cost savings if the town were to be the one to provide the water. And we said, that's fine, but historically, we have not had the best working relationship. Where the lawsuit that we had to file against the town in 2008 for unlawful zoning to the property that was in the town, and we said, we would like the chance to start anew, to start fresh with all of this positive reality. Matt Selmeyer said, we run two businesses. We run the business of the town, and we run the utility business. We have the capacity and the ability to sell water to whoever we would like. That is within our decision-making power and our authority. And we said, that's fantastic. We'll continue to work together in that way. So that's kind of how it evolved, and the authority that Matt said he had is, I don't know, Mr. Harold, if this were to take place today, would the annexation issue, would an application for that be taking place at some point along the way?
Absolutely.
Before your line is in our ground and we've given you an easement?
At some point along the way, I don't know when, but that conversation would have been had in public with council.
You
So
all
the fact that,
confidential,
No, not all is confidential.
right,
No,
right.
after the fact.
So
the
no
fact that
promise
the
would
water
have
line
been
is in
made
the ground.
that annexation.
I would promise that.
Yeah, I think the implication here is that line is in the ground. Therefore, it implies that annexation was not on the table. It was not an issue to be discussed, nor should it be now, in order to give an allocation time into it.
Not really your interpretation,
That is my interpretation. And that of about 25 other people.
and not that of our town attorney.
So if we agree with what he just said, are we breaking the law in terms of our own ordinances?
I wanted to ask a
I'm
question
sorry.
to back up
Go for
before
it.
that, and I think it'll be relevant, which is why I interrupted. So in the ordinances, I mean, I do feel like this is a question coming up in the wording. Any developer or property owner wishing to make application for water service, and I do hear them saying that the water service was offered. How does that relate to an
That's,
application for water service versus?
that's the issue.
Exactly.
I think that's the bottom line. I really don't think we're discussing whether or not the economic development agreement should have been in writing. We're not discussing whether or not that agreement could be ratified today. We're not even going to talk about contract law where partial performance sometimes is evidence of the contract. There's a number of legal things we're not talking about. We have muddied the waters pretty well. There was, in the evidence in the ground, an economic development agreement for the town to take the lead in the construction of water lines under the grant applications. That's done. It's in the ground. Muddied in there was whether the town did agree that we're going to provide water. You don't have to ask for annexation. Clearly, the town could not agree to that. We're going to agree today that when you apply for water in 6 years, you don't have to ask to be annexed. The town has no authority to do that, voluntary or involuntary. I don't think there's a distinction. The question is, for all practical purposes, did in 2016, the developer request water, and at that time, the town not act on whether or not to voluntarily annex it? We've got a very detailed procedure on how you apply for voluntary annexation now. In 2016, I've got a feeling Jessica wasn't writing at that time. Process was probably a lot looser. So it's kind of hard to say if they did or didn't. But Their position is, in 2016, we asked for water, we were told we're gonna get water, and we weren't annexed. If that's the issue, they've got a good argument. If the issue is we need to flesh out the development agreement, and part of that agreement they're asking you to ratify is that we agreed not to annex when they asked for water, my position is that's unenforceable. So it's refining the issue as which way to look at it.
One clarification, from what I'm hearing, it wasn't that they asked for water and we agreed to it, it was that we said, you can have water from us, and we'll work with Asheville. Is that what you're saying? Or did you ask for water?
So the project was going to be supply water from the city of Asheville, and project partners came to us asking if we would agree for water to be provided by the county of Black Mountain. So we didn't go out and ask for it, it was presented to us.
Right, which does feel a little different to me than requesting water from the town versus the town working with Asheville and the county and whoever to say, hey, we can sell you water, right?
So were that have to happen today, would that trigger this D2, that the developer would be therefore making an application for water, even if the town was saying, yeah, we'd love to provide you water. Now you need to make an application for this to be following our ordinances.
With your present staff, that's exactly what would happen.
Jessica.
Yeah.
I've been taking a lot of notes. I think they're,
Maybe we
back up for just a second. I'll keep it short.
Okay, come on up and sit.
So the question that you're not dealing with just a question if there was an agreement to ratify the previous terms. You're also questioning if by extension, if this is a problem, you would want to annex or not. Those are two distinct questions. And the conditions in which this previous council was going to entertain the idea of annexation are different. What predicated even the interest of the town manager, where I do think he overstepped his authority to make such an agreement. The conditions that supported that have changed. Not only are all the permits and whatnot expired from the county, but the conditions that made it seem advantageous, like a burden handed to the town, maybe got a little overexcited and said, oh, this is all this water, this is so great, and it is. But those have changed. Not only is it not the jobs, the amount of water potentially. We don't have a proposed, well, I've actually one proposed project, I wouldn't still say water. But the information that might compel you to have to, how you may make a decision of wanting to annex something are different than they were at the time. I'll take a deep breath. I don't want to be confusing. In addition to that, voluntary annexation is one of the few mechanisms the town has to its tax base to control its corporate limits. Around 2012, 2013, the ability to involuntary annex changed. We used in North Carolina, all of municipalities. And that's not the case anymore. Involuntary annexation is not you just waking up and saying, I probably don't have you. I think you have to have majority percent of the property owners consent to that. So it's not, and so that's also just a little bit of information. I feel like there's a lot of education and conversation just about annexation process and the pros and cons related to that would be helpful to this conversation. And I'm not sure, I know they would like an answer today. I'm not sure that you have to give them an answer today when we're going to talk about. If there's more information that you would like staff to produce to help you navigate the decision-making process. In addition, we're talking about zoning questions. We have conditional zoning now. That is something that was available at the time when this project originally came through. And we keep talking about economic development agreements. In a previous life, before I came to Black Mountain, when I was at Kings Mountain, which is where I was when this originally started, I was involved in such conversations because we had economic development in my department. And even though those conversations are sort of secrecy, we had excellent code names. Agreeing to not annex is not an opportunity to have those development agreements. So the fact that there was confidentiality sworn in those conversations is not related to annexation. It's to everything else. So it may have been the impression, it might have been, Matt may have walked away thinking, I'm sort of secrecy and this is something we talked about, but was not a chip that you could play. I don't play poker, so I don't know if that's the right way to count that. But, so there are a lot of details here and variables, to figure out. It couldn't be any more confusing or more muddy at this point. But Ron's right. I would have never brought this to you without an annexation application, and I've not given that opportunity to anybody else.
That's a good question, just to make sure I heard you correctly. So even if, and this is hypothetical, even if we said, ratified and said, yes, go ahead, you can have water. If we decide to involuntarily annex down, say 2 years from now, we can't do that without the consent from the majority of the people who own the property.
Involuntary annexation now requires a 75% of the population in the annexed area agree to be annexed.
That's what I thought it was saying.
To my knowledge, there's not been a successful involuntary annexation since that law was changed.
That's right. Thank you.
And also, you know, when we talk about annexation, contiguous annexations, if this property is not brought into the town, this is going to make it more challenging to manage corporate boundaries and opportunities for the town in that area. White Mountain is largely built out for sites for economic development, and so these are, that's more detailed conversation I think we have time or prepared to have today, but I don't want it to be overly simplified as we're only asking one question. There are consequences to the response to that question that I don't know if we're ready to have this into the clock today.
I have a question about something I think you said, so help me catch your drift. So I think you mentioned that part of our consideration too is whether or not this annexation would be advantageous to the town. And I'm not clear if that's relevant to the questions coming up today. I understand that, you know, it's hard to not have that on our minds, but can you make that connection of why you feel like that is relevant to what we're talking about right now?
The question at the time about selling water in exchange for not annexing the town, I do not believe is a solid procedure at the time. And all of the conditions around the predicated motivation for that have changed. And so you're essentially, it's a new ask. I understand the infrastructure's there, and the property owner is the same, but the potential volume of water is different, the potential value of those water sales is different, the job impact is different. All of the permits have expired, you know, and so you are, in essence, you're starting, it is a new request.
Because what we're saying is that the verbal undocumented agreement did not follow the ordinances. Contextually, this is a new situation that we're looking at. Sure.
In fact, in broad strokes, yes. If you were brought this today to ask for such a thing, the information you would have to help make that decision is remarkably different than what may have motivated some of those things in the first place.
And I think what makes this real cloudy is the fact that originally this would have never came to you because Asheville was serving the water. You wouldn't have had an opportunity. But since that got changed and we decided to take over that water, that changes things somewhat. Now, I don't know where that got lost in that translation 6 years ago, but I can't speak to that. But
Well, again, that just wasn't, we did the water, not because of Black Mountain Technology. We did this because this is something that's been ongoing for years and trying to supplement our water system and take over some of these lines.
That makes sense.
Perspective, but it would also require the agreement of property owner too, right? Mr. Harrell was totally correct. We couldn't move forward with the project, having the city water, the city of Asheville water in the town would never have accomplished that unless our agreement to allow the town to provide water, right? So it's triangular.
Sure, there's definitely mutual benefit for multiple parties.
So just so I understand our options, getting back to that question, if we approve their request or acknowledge that there was an agreement before, are we breaking our town law?
That's a water agreement you're acknowledging.
So say it again.
Depends on what agreement you acknowledge, which is very difficult with none of it being in writing. We can't point at agreement A and agreement B. From my point of view, you're either being asked to ratify the economic development agreement that Matt allegedly made, in which he agreed that when they asked for water, we would not ask that we would not annex them, and not require them to ask for annexation. Or are we ratifying an agreement that the deal was done, that everything was in motion, that the ask for water had been made, and you can, I'm not saying that Dana walked up to you and said, can I ask for water? But did the town view it as, once the city of Asheville passed it off to us, as that being the request for water, and we started building water lines? Was that the ask, and was the ask already made, and no request, they didn't push the petition for annexation? And is that the agreement? Is that the point in time that they're asking us to ratify? And again, some of my statements there are partially theoretical, as you know, but are you conferring an agreement to provide water that was already asked when the city said, town, will you step in? And we said, yes. Is that the ask? Or is the ask today, when you've got a new user of the property who wants water, or possible user of the property wants water, we have to ratify the economic development agreement, in which Matt said we would give you water without making you ask for annexation? I think the second question, as I phrased it, is enough. Because we didn't have the ability to agree in the future not that require them to ask for annexation. The first question is the one you got them all the facts and decide whether you can view it that way. Again, I'm not arguing either. I'm just trying to pick the pieces out of what's been presented. If you can look at it as the ask was made and the city of Asheville said, you take this ball and run with it, we don't want to be the supplier. The direct suppliers of the water as possible, the town can say, we can ratify that and they can have water for this development. The problem with that, of course, it's a different development. That's probably the cat's gonna get wrong with that. But it is from my point of view, that's an easier one for the town to say, yes, we can ratify that. We did do that.
I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that the town took actions, whether they were lawful or not, to supply water to the Avalon property. And, by applying for grants and by spending money, the town council or the board of aldermen at the time would have to approve some of those budget changes that imagine those budget amendments.
You're right, you may have found budget amendments, but it was never any of our money.
Okay.
Probably approve the grant contracts. I mean, you approve the resolution in support of those grant contracts, or grant applications.
I mean, so it's clear that in 2016, and clear to me, in my opinion, that the town council wanted to supply water to the Avalon property, out of the Avalon project. But that project doesn't exist today, right?
That's correct.
When that fell through, everything else fell through, I guess.
Exactly.
Respectfully, it did fall through, right? The main is still in our property. Right? And that's the point I want to make is that, the other question is, what is water service, right? I mean, those mains are extended to our property, they're there, right? The only thing the town is being asked to do now is to pump the water down the main, right? There's no future expenditures for additional service lines that would be extended or things that would typically worry about for annexation in town fund, right? So, in my view, service was provided back in 2016. If we got to the point where the water was turned on, the town would then be in a position to turn it off and say, well, we don't like that Abbott went bankrupt and somebody else is there now, right? So, I think the fact that development projects along our table is independent from the mechanisms that were put in place, not one of the property, which the lines there.
I would respectfully disagree with that. And the reason I say that is because the council or whoever was in the room making the decisions for that, I would say basically used as part of that process in making that decision because of the Abaddon project. Because that's what was going up. That's what enticed them to say yes. So now it's a totally different project. And we don't know what that project is at this moment. So we will be making a decision to like, you have water for something that we don't know what's gonna happen. Yes, so I would respectfully disagree.
I certainly respect your opinion. I mean, to me, then it becomes a question of not whether there was any agreement in 2016, right? In 2016, we didn't know that Ogden was going to fail, right? That was horribly. So at that point, the way I would respond to your point, which I certainly respect, is we're no longer talking about whether the agreement was reached in 2016. We're talking about whether we should live up to it this morning. I think that's an entirely different question. And if your view is that the agreement shouldn't be lived up to, certainly respect that. But I think it's a different question as to whether the agreement was there or whether the agreement was lawful, which I'm hearing from Mr. Steve, he believes, given the nature of the
But
request,
then again,
that it is.
if there was an agreement, where's the agreement?
Certainly. I certainly.
We don't have an agreement. You don't have a copy of an agreement. And just because the pipe is in the ground doesn't mean the water has to go through the pipe.
And if we find ourselves in a situation where the pipe stays in the ground, the town can't find providing water for it, then so be it. Certainly, we want to continue the mutually beneficial relationship that was started in 2016. Like I said, there are other options, but we thought the most simplest, straightforward solution, and the one that continues a mutually beneficial relationship, was to come to you and to formalize the agreement that was reached. Town's not in favor of doing that, so be it, but we thought that it was the most rational, simplest, and solution that would allow us to continue to work together in a way that benefits both sides.
When we kind of have a vote, we want to go ahead and follow maybe Jessica's advice there, go ahead and send this on to planning, let's discuss this further.
I don't think this goes back to planning. This is not their department at this point. Only this board can decide whether or not there was an agreement that was verbal, but we can ratify, or whether or not the ask for water was basically done when the city of Asheville turned to us to do the contract for to put the water lines in, and where those two questions lead. Not planning. Jessica's point, I believe, was one of the reasons that the 2016 unwritten agreement may be of little consequence now is in 2016, if it had come to this board and you had an application for annexation, you might have looked at it and said, at this point, we're talking about a small piece of their property. We're talking about a small piece of their property to provide 551 jobs. We're looking at a small piece of their property. It's an industrial activity, which would be a large user of water that they're paying for, as opposed to today. Your reasons for asking for or annexing today are different than then. There are other reasons, as I reported. We always had up until a few weeks ago the ability to extend our authority into an ETJ. We don't have that anymore. That's gone. So a lot of the scenarios, things have changed in that 7 years about how this board might look at annexation. You might have met in 2016 and said, tell them to put their petition in, but no, we talked amongst ourselves, we talked in front of the public, we don't want that property, but they need to file a petition, but we need an indication. Nobody on this city board is likely to vote for it. Will that happen today? We don't know. But a lot of things have changed. The scenarios changed. Your answer might be different. Freda did identify that a lot of developments in an economic development agreement situation. They ask for water and they petition for annexation, and they want the boards to commit to annexing. And the boards cannot commit to annexing until the question's raised. And the flip side of that is, we can't commit to not annexing. We can only do that in an agreement with another city. And you guys are familiar with one of those, when Fletcher was incorporated. It had to agree not to annex into the airport property. I just further noted water, I'm sure.
I was gonna say,
But those are considerations when you are looking at annexing. And Jessica's point is, all that's changed in 7 years.
what I was gonna say is the town certainly agreed that we don't have to ask for annexation. That's not binding, it's authority, right? It's really good,
The town certainly can require that you ask for annexation.
but it could agree, it could also agree that we don't have to ask.
That's not what I mean.
Only when the question comes before them can they decide. They can't agree that you don't have to ask.
I think I respectfully disagree with you on that.
Well,
Must petition.
You gotta change the code, but I think as it reads today, that's how we've all interpreted it.
Again, you're listening to lawyers, opposing.
It's issues of state law versus local law too. Great, this is not a simple issue.
So if you can state then, because I'm trying to distill what our council says, state concisely what agreement it is you're asking us to ratify.
Agreement to provide water to this property that is located outside city limits.
But as we said, there's nothing in writing anywhere. There's no record of that.
Mr. Mayor,
No one disputes that.
the town does have the ability to ratify a verbal agreement. And I think that's why we're here today. I think we're boiled down to what's the agreement.
So your request is a new request for water to the property.
That's not correct. Our request is for the town to formally ratify its 2016 agreement to provide water to this property, which is located outside town.
And I'm still not clear on the legal implications of us honoring a request that is not in writing, that should, I think the agreement of most folks up here, it goes against our ordinances.
Ms. Berry, what I would respond to that is, as I tried to say before, is that I'm hesitant and I'm not asking this council to be the legal arbiter of whether this is, you're not judge, jury, executioner, right? I think the point is that the town is supportive and would continue to stand by the ratification of that agreement that was reached in 2016. I'm confident that Mr. Steve Nye or his successor can come to this council with a written agreement to be, that both of us would be in agreement that it complies with state and local.
I have to imagine there are legal implications to that decision of the
There are,
council.
but unfortunately, you're not the Court of Appeals, so you don't have to worry about doing damage to others in the future. But, if this board were so inclined to conclude from the information you received that in 2016, when the city of Ashland said take over the water part of this project, you implicitly agreed to provide water. And no pressure was put on the applicant to make his application for voluntary annexation. And I would probably put that part in, but I think that's implicit. If you say the ask was made to the town to provide water, and by taking over and joining in the grant process, the town agreed to provide that water, period, is that the agreement? Did that happen? And is that, can you ratify that agreement?
Saw when that happened. I said, so did all of that happen?
Yeah, I'm taking the facts from what I'm told.
If I'm not mistaken, the easements that run through our property were granted to the county, correct? So the county, it wasn't the town that installed the infrastructure, the county provided it. Through an easement to the county, everything was transferred to the town subsequently, right? So at the time.
We installed the infrastructure, the county gave us easements because it was in the county,
Yeah, the county.
That's correct.
Yeah.
and then turned them over to us.
Yeah.
That's right.
And there was money used from Golden Leaf and the other.
EDA, that's right. Economic
So-
Development District.
If we empower, this attorney and our new attorney to draft an agreement, it would come back to us for approval, correct? Based on what you just said.
I would highly recommend that in writing.
I don't want to take over this council's typical
I'm just-
procedures. Yeah, my point would be that this is going to be reduced to writing. We don't have one right now, right? So I think the best procedure in the town, or the support of it, would be to task the attorneys to reducing it to paper, and that can be brought back for consideration.
That's what I'm getting at. I'm just trying to move this thing forward.
Yeah.
So if, perhaps what we could agree to today is that happens, that you and the new attorney come up with an agreement for our review. And maybe we approve it, maybe we don't, but at least we have something in writing to look at and consider.
I certainly think that'd be appropriate.
But I think though, at that time, what this agreement, what he's referring to then would just be strictly going ahead and honoring or you getting water without dealing with annexation at all.
Well,
And
then
that's
I'm
gonna be
ready to,
different.
I'm ready to consider that at the next step of this, but I don't think we're gonna decide it this morning. If we need to have something to move forward on, we can reject it at that point in time.
As long as everyone's aware that,
Yeah.
just because they get an agreement, because our rule now is, you want water, you volunteer. it.
Right, so, but it gets, we all have heard this already, it gets muddy when you just, if they've already gotten the agreement from the city of Asheville. So,
And I tried to outline it a moment ago, but assuming a majority of this board feels this way, an agreement would have a couple of, whereases. Well, whereas in 2016, the town of White Mountain, Florida Economic Development Agreement was requested to provide water. That request being implied by the city of Asheville that we take over the construction installation. And whereas at that time, the town board did not elect to annex the property, now therefore, here be it resolved that the town shall provide water based on the agreement to provide water made in 2016. So a one pager getting away from a lot of the muddy stuff that's confusing that. Now there's some underlying facts. You guys have got to make that decision. You may conclude now that did not imply that we agreed to provide water back to the original position, whereas that we cannot ratify the entire economic development agreement as proposed to us, or as described to us, because it included an agreement not to ask them to ask for annexation. I think those are the two pieces. But you and Craig Justice can work that out.
do we need a motion or what? No,
I guess I certainly am not asking to bind council on any vote right now. I think it would be appropriate to have the written agreement in front of you before voting. I would just like to see some indication that council would be supportive of moving forward with that approach. What I don't want to do is work with Mr. Justice for a document that helps say why we have this. So if there's at least willingness for council to entertain and take a look at what the written agreement would look like, we'd certainly be happy to work with Mr. Steve's successor in getting that done.
I guess what he's asking is, are there enough people on this board who would like to find a way to give them water or enough on the fence that they might yet be convinced to make it worthwhile to give you a written agreement to look at.
Or just say no to that.
Or,
Yeah, if the answer's gonna be no, it's sort of, no,
Just say no, so you got-
yeah. If you don't have a majority, or at least a good number inclined to at least need to know more and possibility of deciding in their favor, then he doesn't want to spend the time and the money to write an agreement you're not gonna talk about.
Anybody want to venture out?
I'm willing to talk about it. I'd like to see a written agreement. That's me.
Anybody else want?
I'm on the fence, I would be willing to look at it. There's a lot of it that troubles me on both sides, all the way around. You know, it's an unfortunate situation, there's no question about it. But I mean, what troubles me is all the basis of that was for this project for a factory that's going to employ 551 people that doesn't exist anymore. But I get all that, but I'm willing to consider it.
I would have to say too, that is my sticking point too, as you well know already. However, I would be willing to look at the agreement.
Yeah, I feel very much the same way. You know, where I wrestle with is if, let's say, had moved forward, made progress for a few years or whatever, and then went bankrupt, but we had already spent some money in water, and shifted to Ingalls or, you know, whatever else, then that agreement would have in place, and you know, we continue to supply that water, I imagine. So, you know, if you look at it from that lens, then I mean, it makes sense that we shouldn't really consider those jobs or the reasoning for supplying that water, but that didn't happen, and now we're in a different place. So I'm very much still on the fence, but yeah, so I would be happy to entertain it, but yeah, all over the place.
I concur. Rick's one.
So it sounds like everybody wants to see an agreement. And then we can discuss it further. That what I'm hearing?
Probably the worst case scenario for the lawyers.
So basically, this agreement that will come back will probably be an agreement of giving water. And probably no annexation.
Well,
That's kind of what,
the way I worded it, annexation would be treated like that question was asked and answered 7 years ago. It just won't come back up. The flip side, I would still think that's really the issue. And you'll look at that, won't agree with the reasoning and the whereases, and we'll say, no, we need a different resolution.
so we've given marching orders.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. That's the case. Anybody else got anything they want to say? If not, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's fine, or fix that during the meeting, so. Mine.
So I'm gonna slide by you.
Right ahead.
Bye, everybody.
In my mind, it fell off and the bottom didn't do it. But there's no statute.
There was another one that had my name on it also.
Yes, I'll run you from that one, and next time you stop by, I'll have, this one was, we needed today.
You have X amount of years to get this done, and you don't. That shit is sailed.
That should have been written